Hello, and I'm so sorry I cannot join you here in person at Futuromundo, but at least I can share some thoughts with you through this video. We live in a world in which everything is changing. You know, a couple of years ago, we tested students in reading and mathematics through our global PISA assessments, and you could see 15-year-old students could get about 60% of the reading tasks right and about 50% of the mathematics tasks. Well, when we gave that same test to ChatGPT, we could actually see in reading artificial intelligence outperformed 15-year-olds on average. Not all 15-year-olds, but the average student. Mathematics is a bit harder for artificial intelligence. This is not just about, projecting things through large language models, but, you have to, develop conceptual understanding, do mathematic modeling. It's a bit harder for artificial intelligence, but 6 months later, you could see how technology had progressed. And a year later, you could see artificial intelligence outperform the average 15-year-old, even in mathematics. We have learned to educate second-class robots, people who are very good at repeating what we told them. But we need to think harder what makes us humans in an age in which the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test have also become easy to digitize, to automate. When you think about, what learning for tomorrow's world will mean, what should we expect from teachers, from schools? I think we probably agree on one thing easily, and that is that school should help you figure out why you are here on this planet now. What is important to you? What difference do you want to make in this world? School should also help you understand where you are really, really good at now. What are the extraordinary talents of ordinary students? How can we uncover them? And that's not as easy as giving students lots of choices, but it really requires educators who are not just a good instructor, but also a good coach, a good mentor, a good facilitator, a creative designer of innovative learning environments. But just following your passion never makes you happy. What makes us happy in life is making a difference to other people, to the world around us. So helping young people understand what the world expects from them, what the world needs from them, is crucially important. And then ultimately, how we can translate better skills and better jobs and better lives of people. So if that's the goal, how are we doing? Well, when you talk about, the global PISA results, Singapore always comes out when we test reading, mathematics, and science. Singaporean students are incredibly strong academically. But when you scratch the surface, there are also important weaknesses. You can see the orange bar is shorter than the OECD average, which is marked here by the blue dot. Singaporean kids are not particularly happy. They don't show a particularly strong level of emotional resilience. And that's so important in the world in which we live today. Can you find out what your right place in this world is, and can you reconfigure that when the world around changes? Can you recover from failure? Do you develop that growth mindset? You can see the quality of social relationship is not that strong in Singapore. The way students relate to each other, the way they relate to their teachers, and once again, in this world we don't live alone. Can you not just live with yourself, but can you live with people who are different from you? So you can see a country that is very, very strong on something that we have learned to look at when we study education, still have a lot of homework to do in other areas. Let me bring you to the other end of the world, in Peru. You can see the yellow bar is pretty short, only 3 out of 10 points. Peruvian students struggle in reading, in mathematics, and science. Academic learning has to go a long, long way. But at the same time, Peruvian kids are quite happy. You see, the orange bar is much stronger than the OECD average. Peruvian students show a good level of agency and engagement. They can do things. They can mobilize their cognitive, social, emotional resources. They show a strong level of emotional resilience. They can recover when they fail because they've learned to struggle. They show a good level of inequality of social relationships. They can organize their lives beyond school. Now, when you look at Singapore and Peru, you might ask yourself, maybe we have to make a choice. Either we, educate kids really well, we push them academically, and then they end up unhappy with a low level of agency and resilience. Or we become like the Peruvians, where everybody is happy, but, not particularly smart in academic outcomes. But, that's a false choice. You can look at a country like Denmark that gets, pretty much everything right. You can see Danish kids are very good academically. They show a good level of psychological well-being. They're happy children. They show good level of agency. Danish kids do not just sit in class as passive consumers. They do things. They're very much engaged in active learning, experiential learning. They can set their own learning goals, monitor their own process. They show good level of emotional resilience. And they're open to different ideas, perspectives. They appreciate different ways of thinking, different cultures, different ways of walking. See, we can reconcile the kind of aspects in education that are so important for tomorrow's world. Now, one thing that should get us to think, I want to focus on one specific aspect, in this world of tomorrow, being creative, being imaginative. Being able to develop, ingenuity is so important. But in almost every jurisdiction for which we collect the data, we could see that 15-year-olds tended to report lower levels of creativity than 10-year-olds. That's a damning, indicator of where we are going. If I would tell you your 15-year-olds do worse in mathematics than your 10-year-olds, you will see that's crazy. Kids always learn something in school. But maybe not everywhere. That's something where we will need to become better. Every child is born with an abundance of creativity. If you have a 3-year-old son or daughter, they're going to question anything you tell them. They're going to experiment with everything you put into their hands. They're always willing to learn, always willing to unlearn, always willing to relearn when the context changes. But then, we put them into our school systems. We try to make them compliant with established ways of thinking. And then we may lose some of that energy that drives, the 21st century. I'm a scientist by background, and I can tell you sometimes it breaks my heart when I see how we teach science like religion. We make young people believe in some scientific theory, then we give them lots of exercises to practices, and at the end we test whether they can replicate the answers we taught them. Well, that has nothing to do with science. Science is never about reproducing the established wisdom of our times, but about questioning it. So we got to do better. So in the last PISA assessment, we actually measured student creative thinking. And let me show you a few results. The first thing that was really, really interesting is that, if you do well in math, that doesn't mean you're automatically doing well in creativity. Some countries actually do much better in creative thinking than what you expect from their mathematics performance. You can see Mexico, you can see Chile, Australia. Kids are doing better in solving creative tasks than what you would have predicted from mathematics. In other countries, creativity is really, really hard. Now, the mathematics may be good, but creativity is hard. So creative thinking is not just a simple byproduct of being academically good. And you can see the same thing, when you look at this across quintiles of performance. Here on the left side, I show you the quintiles of performance on creative thinking on this test. And on the right side, the same thing for mathematics. So when you look at the top quintile in creative thinking, some of them do really well in mathematics, but other not that well. You can see the same when you look at the fourth quintile. You can see some people who are not so strong in creative thinking actually do extremely well in mathematics. Some are not doing so well. Third quintile also, quite all over the place. Now, at the bottom, it's different. You need a certain foundation. You can see if you do not master, some level of creativity, it's going to be very hard for you to be good in mathematics, because mathematics is one way to express creative thinking skills. But the simple story is that, we should not equate academic performance with creative thinking. It's actually something quite different. There's another interesting thing that we saw, and that is that girls are stronger creative thinkers. And that's true in almost every country. Girls come out better on this assessment of creative thinking because they're more open to different perspectives, different ways of thinking. I'm going to show you that underlying features in a moment in more detail. But it's something that should give us to think. Our environments seem to be fostering that creativity better among girls than among boys. And in some countries, the differences are very big. You look at, Finland and Jordan. In other countries, they are more modest. So again, it's not inherent in boys and girls. It depends very much on the environment in which students grow up. Students' beliefs, attitudes, and expectations. Now, let's then start with the beliefs about creativity. What we can see very clearly is that growth mindset is a very, very important predictor for academic performance, where students believe, if I study hard, my teacher's going to help me and I'm going to be successful. Typically, countries with those shared beliefs, look at Estonia here, are also doing really well academically. Whereas countries where students believe, it's all about the intelligence I was born with, why should I study hard? You can see countries in which those beliefs are prevalent tend not to do well academically now. The relationship is not, 100%, but you can see beliefs really matter. Let's look at attitudes towards creative thinking. Creative self-efficacy, openness to intellect, openness to art and experience, imagination, adventurousness. Our data show clearly that, change in creative thinking performance is associated with those attitudes. You can see imagination and adventurousness, openness to intellect, openness to art and experience, creative self-efficacy. Where students had more experiences in those fields, they tended to do better on this assessment of creative thinking. So it's not just what you teach, it's very much about, the kind of attitudes that we develop. You can look at social and emotional characteristics and think of curiosity, persistence, perspective taking, assertiveness, cooperation, stress resistance, emotional control. Curiosity. It's really, really interesting that you have, some countries, and you might not expect Costa Rica comes out very strongly where students, express a lot of curiosity and interest. In other countries, it's much less pronounced. Persistence. Also, another really, really important driver of creativity. Creativity is not just to have an idea. Creativity is often a very organized, systematic process. You can see students in Peru show that level of persistence. Students in Finland, a country that does academic like well, are not showing those kinds of strengths. Perspective taking. Look at the data here. You can see very clearly that, in Portugal, for example, where students are able to see the world through different lenses and perspectives, appreciate different ways of thinking, are open to different cultures. They tend to do better on creative thinking. And that's also the explanation why girls come out so much better, because girls are much better than boys in taking different perspectives. You can look at, cooperation, the social skill dimensions. The students in Indonesia, many of the learning experiences of Indonesian students work through collaboration. Students do a lot together. They help each other. They work in groups and teams. And you can see that seems to be associated with better performance on creative thinking. Not the case in Macau and China. Assertiveness. Finding your way, overcoming difficulties. Now, again, the Portuguese, Italian students coming out really quite well on that. Other countries struggling more. Stress resistance, emotional control. Also really, really important attributes. When you are creative, you have, encounter problems, difficulties, setbacks, and can you recover from all of this? Now, students in Ireland, students in Denmark, show very good levels of stress resistance and emotional control. And you could see before the very important predictors on performance. Where students are better in perspective thinking, they tend to do better on the creative thinking test, where they show greater levels of curiosity, greater persistence, more stress resistance, assertiveness, social skills, emotional control. Now, all of those were important predictors on this. The last point I want to make is about technology. Technology has never been a magic power, but it's an incredible amplifier, an incredible accelerator. It's going to amplify good ideas and good practices in education in the same way it can amplify poor ideas and poor experiences in education. What have we learned? Students' use of digital devices and creative thinking skills. It's really interesting, where students use digital learning activities at school. You can see doing some of this is really good, moderate intensity in a structured environment, teacher-led, can actually lead to better outcomes. Doing that on weekends, even better, even more hours, this is a worthwhile thing. You can extend your learning there. You can use digital tools, and it's not just good academically. You can also develop, better creative thinking skills to the extent that you can read a causal nature into those relationships. But it's very different when you use devices for leisure at school. Having your smartphone in school is not a great idea when it comes to becoming more creative or more academically talented. There's a clear negative relationship. Students get distracted, and it's not just about academic outcomes. We also see that they feel more lonely. They feel poorer social relationships. Once again, cause and effect could go in both ways, but there is a clear relationship. And even at weekends, put your limits on that. So yeah, technology can be an amazing enabler where teachers are very, very good in deploying it. But it can also get into the way of, not just academic performance, but also creativity in particular. When we ask, teachers, why don't you do more of this? What are the barriers to this? Most said, we've got already to do so many things. The curriculum is a mile wide and just an inch deep. It doesn't allow opportunities for creativity. We have to just plough to so much stuff. A lack of assessment. You can only improve what you can see. And often we don't put much of a premium on measuring creativity, and that is what teachers say, leads them not to focus on that. And then lack of teacher training. So there are some really, really important barriers that we will need to overcome, and I'm sure here at Futuromundo you're going to talk about those kinds of things. The last point really I want to make is the question, can we do that at scale? We know that some people are very creative, some schools are great in fostering creativity, but can we make that happen throughout the system? And the answer is some countries are pretty good at that. You can see here in the case of Estonia, one of the top performers on this assessment, you can see there's very little variability across schools. Every school is a creative school. In the United Arab Emirates, in the other end of the scale, you can see 70% of the performance variation is between schools. Some schools are doing incredibly well. Others are very much falling behind. But I think the Estonian example shows us that we can make that an attribute of our education system, a pretty predictable outcome of a good school system. And that's a school system that prepares young people for their future. At the OECD, if you're interested in this, we have developed a toolkit that teachers can use if they want to, build, resources for creative thinking. It helps them understand what creative thinking looks like when teaching, learning, and also gives them assessment tools for formative assessment to see, how their students are progressing. It includes a bank of resources that, provide examples how to teach, creativity and creative thinking in different school subjects, and also professional learning framework for teachers. Now, how can I become better to become, an enabler of the creative thinking of young people, which is the energy that will drive our future? Thank you very much.